Hello and welcome to Astrology and Magic. My name is Valkyria Vroder. I will be your host today. I'm super excited about this. This course is going to be about moon magic. So this is our first episode, our first space holding about eclipse magic and moon magic. Any updates that need to be shared with you are going to be linked in the description below. If you want email updates about when the blogs come out or when the podcasts come out, there's an option to do that down below as well. There's books as offerings. There's a whole bunch of stuff. Okay, so if you're interested in any of the cool things that I put out for people, then check out what's below. I did just open up my sessions again, so if you're interested in that, I've been kind of on and off with them recently. So for now, they're open. That might change in the near future, but for now, they're here. So if you're interested, in sitting with me, they're available. Is there anything else updates? I do have my weird tarot deck and my Norse rune decks are officially up for practitioners for practice. They're up and available on the website if you're interested in that. There's some other updates too, but for now, I think I'm going to keep it simple for all of us. That's what it is. And let's move into moon magic. I'm looking forward to this. Like I said, this is a part of a larger course. I am releasing this course, Eclipse Magic, Moon Magic, prior to eclipse season of 2024 in September and October, in hopes that this gives people a little bit more of a firm and grounded understanding when it comes to our eclipses. Because, hello, our eclipses are so powerful, they're so large. I didn't really understand how large and how dense the cycles of our eclipses were until I started studying astrology. They're literally gigantic. Like before, I was like, oh yeah, obviously eclipses are powerful, fantastic. But then you look at the perspective of how many moon cycles are in the eclipses, and it breaks your brain a little bit. It is what it is. So the introduction, the introduction to this eclipse magic course is going to be based in the moon magic and the moon cycles. It's really important, I feel like, to have a grounded understanding of what moon magic is before you even start to look at the eclipses, just because of how big they are. So let's talk about moon magic. First and foremost, before we even start talking about the this is what happens on a new moon and this is what happens on the full, that sort of stuff, the moon phases and whatnot, I want to start with cycle magic. Like, moon magic is the ruler of cycle magic. Every single planetary object or planet, it rules over something. And moon magic, the moon, our moon, is what rules over our cycles. So if you're ever working with cycle magic, womb-bodied people know these cycles usually more ancestrally, innately, but there are ancestral cycles that other people experience. I don't want to diminish that experience. I just mean, like, we womb-bodied people have wombs that shed. That's just what it is. So there's other ways that we go through these cycles ancestrally, but there's also like the cycles of the earth in terms of like the seasons. We have those sorts of cycles. There's so many different sorts of cycles. Okay, there's literally so many different sorts of cycles. When we think about moon magic, the reason I bring the womb-bodied cycles up is because we normally relate, 28 days is the womb body cycle. We got 28 days for the moon cycle. So it tracks. It's just what it is. So if you would like to relate this powerful information, to be honest with you, if you would like to relate this to your personal womb cycle, moon cycle, then feel free to, and kind of move things around as necessary and needed. People experience things very differently. So if you have a different experience of what happens on the first quarter moon, it doesn't exactly line up with what you have going on, or there's more nuances to what you are working with that I have not mentioned, then yeah, for sure, like, be your own teacher. I support it. Good for you. So that is kind of the space I want to start with, is just like, this magic can be applied to so many different cycles, cycle magic. And what is cycle magic? I haven't even really touched on that. I suppose that's true. What is cycle magic? Cycle magic would be the magic that you have to start and then eventually it ends. And the way that you start a cycle is the same way that that cycle comes to a close. Just think about that for a moment. The same way that you start a cycle is how it's going to end. All right, were you betrayed? Were you betrayed by someone? And that's how a cycle started? Well, then there has to be some sort of non-betrayal on the other side, figuring out all the different ways that that betrayal has impacted you so that you're able to then stop betraying yourself or stop carrying it with you. Like, we are exiting, before you entered into that cycle, you didn't understand. Say that you've never been betrayed before, you are innocent to betrayal. then you are betrayed, and then you have to work through the loss of that innocence. Well, then on the other side of exiting that cycle, you're going to feel comfortable in the innocence again. And that betrayal isn't going to really bother you. So the same way that we enter a cycle is the same way that we exit it. And if you're looking at warding magic when it comes to cycle magic, which warding magic, I love warding magic, definitely one of my specialties. So we're going to take a little side tangent and go into that for a moment. Warding magic is the practices of wards. There's a lot of different ways to explain it, and I wasn't planning on getting into the nuances of warding magic in this episode, in this session, in this space, but you know what, we're here, so I won't go too deep into it. But when it comes to cycle magic and warding magic, there's two different ways that you could be warded out of a cycle. One of them is like a palindrome. So the word like race car, you entered into the cycle of the word race car with the letter R, and you're exiting with the letter R also. So if you're in a warded cycle, then it's going to be a mirrored reflection from like start to finish. And the middle point will be the reflection space where things kind of like flip and turn in the other direction. So that's one way that warding magic can really like start to intertwine with cycle magic. If you're not experiencing a cycle that is warded like that, then there's nothing wrong with that. I just wanted to give the example so that in case that is something that you experience, that you have the example with you. The other way that warding magic can really like affect cycles is that, say that you start the cycle and then all of a sudden there's something else that happens right after that, like the cycle started and then there's step one. It could be that when you exit the cycle, so you've gone through everything that you need to, and then when you exit the cycle on the other side, then you go through step one again on the other side of the cycle. And that would be kind of confusing because you're not entering the same cycle. You're not entering the cycle you're in preparation to leave the cycle when you're in that first step. So the cycle starts, there's a step one, you go through so many, step 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, okay, so many other steps, and then you get to the end of it and the cycle ends. Okay, so you exit the cycle the same way that you entered it. Like if let's use the letter R as an example. It might not be the race car word, as that's another example, but we'll use the letter R. Say that you enter the cycle on a letter R and you exit the cycle on a letter R. What comes after R? S. So if you start the cycle R and then it goes S, it will be a whole bunch of other different letters in between, but then you don't get to the next letter R until you exit the cycle. And then probably if you're working with warding magic and warding your cycles, when you exit that cycle, there will be an S on the other side of exiting that cycle, whereas there might not be if the cycle was not warded. So that's two different examples of how warding magic can really come through and like affect different cycles or different cycles that you're experiencing, have started, or going through. What warding magic means for you, that's something different for everyone too. For me, it's like the interaction with the veils, the things that we're not able to see. Being born on Halloween, that's just like a part of my practice, is to sit with the wards and to cut cords and to put up boards and all the wards. So I'll probably be bringing in more of that information in the future, and apparently right now too, because that was not in the planned structure of today. But you know what? Sometimes things go unplanned. That's been a theme for a couple of months. Expect the unexpected. If you're going through, expect the unexpected right now. I'm right there with you. That is true. So moving on through. So that's an introduction to cycle magic, just kind of like a brief overview before we get into the phases of the moon itself. Starting with our new moon. Oh my goodness. So our moon phases. I have been studying moon magic for so long. Being that's a subjective amount of time. It's been several years since I've started being pretty like consistent with it. More than several years. It's probably been like 5 or 6 that I've been really like in the groove of studying moon magic, and it's just gotten more and more serious and more detailed throughout the years. And I look back at like a couple of years ago when there was like eclipses or new moons or just like things going on, and I'm so grateful I started tracking the moon cycles and like keeping a journal, like a catalog, basically a recording of everything that was going on in my life with what the moon was doing, because now I look back and I'm like, oh, there's no way that younger me would have known that. I didn't have all the tools I have now. But it started a cycle. I started a cycle years ago. Now here I am. So I definitely recommend keeping some sort of like record or tracker of everything that you're going through. And because sometimes we enter into cycles and we don't even realize it. That's part of the new moon, is it's dark, it's shadowed, it's the first light. That's what the new moon is. The new moon is not the darkest moon in the sky, but it is very dark still. It's the first light. The new moon is the first light. So we're still really shadowed. There's still a lot of like, I've seen people get woven into, myself included, I've seen people get woven into some pretty sketchy cycles on new moons. So if you're someone who is unsure of anything and you don't want to be involved with it and you don't want to weave it in to like start a cycle, I would recommend that you just tell the truth with yourself. Tell the truth with yourself. Is it something that you really want to do? Is it something? Pay attention to the new moons. They're gonna sneak up on you if you don't pay attention to them. So if you're paying attention to them, then probably nothing bad will happen. Just having discernment with yourself and about yourself, with how you're moving and how you're grooving, is pretty important, because the new moon, it is where we start the cycle. It's where we sow our seeds. It's where if we need to pull weeds, we put the intention to have those weeds pulled, because removal is a part of cycles. Like, we don't just build. Like, destruction is a force that exists for a reason on this earth. Thank goodness. I'm so grateful for death and destruction. That's true. I'm grateful for life also. Yeah. And both, they go together. So, but yeah, that's the new moon, is like, that's the beginning. We might not understand fully at the start of a cycle what it is that we're starting. For me, I usually try to be as articulate as possible, but another thing about the moon is that it's a shapeshifter. Love you, moon. Love you, water. Moons are shapeshifters. Moons like to give. They like to receive. They like to reseed. They like to move about in their form. They don't really ever look the same. They go through, the phases. And we have a new moon in Cancer at one point in the year. We're not going to have another new moon in Cancer until a year later. So we go through so many different transformational positions every single year. Think about that for a minute. We only have one phase. So like, let's use Cancer, because the moon rules Cancer in astrology as an example. With Cancer energy, there's a new moon in Cancer, and then the next moon cycle, Cancer is going to be in a different phase, totally and completely. And then the moon cycle after that, it's going to be in another phase, totally and completely. Eventually, we get to the full moon. Okay, that's like 6 months after that new moon in Cancer. Beautiful. And then we have more phases. So we only experience one phase of each moon every single year. There's so much cycle shifting, changing, rearranging. Like, just to put into perspective, that's a crazy picture to look at. You are only in the same moon, and the transits change so much in between each year. You're only the same person, or in the same energy with the moon once a year. I think I'm blowing my own mind right now. I don't know that I had that perspective before I started this. Like, I understood it logically, but to say it out loud is a completely different thing. So the new moons, they're pretty important, because they start that big cycle. They start that monthly cycle, but they also start that 6-month cycle. So once we get through the different phases of the moon, I do want to talk a little bit more about the big cycles that happen, the 6-month to a year cycles. But for now, I just want to focus on, the smaller stuff, because it can be a little bit easier to focus on the smaller stuff and then go into the big stuff. So that's the new moon. That's the start of it. Between the new moon and the first quarter moon, that's where, for me, I'm working. That's where I'm putting in the work. I'm putting in this is what needs to be done here. I might, again, not fully understand the articulation of what it is that I'm doing or why I'm doing it. So paying attention, because again, sometimes we don't know what gets sewn into the new moons. And so really paying attention to like, what is going on? Why am I feeling this way? Why do I feel compelled or called to go and do these things? And kind of keeping up with your own pace and making sure that you're embracing your own pace, because moon magic is so shapeshiftery and it like intertwines all of us together. making sure that you are very aware of how you are shape-shifting and where that shape-shifting is coming from is also really important for the protection aspect of moon magic, because you could be intertwined with other people's cycles where they've woven something 3 or 4 years ago that you have no idea about, but because you have spent time with them around a dark moon, now you're integrated within that cycle, and you're probably going to be in that cycle until either you are able to complete the cycles you need to so you can exit out of it, or they are exiting out of it in their magic and practice. Moon magic, like I said, can be schemy. I don't have a lot of other words about that. Just make sure you protect yourself and stay aware. Not to scare you, but it's like real serious. So so there's that too. So between the new moon and the first quarter moon, that's where the work is done. The weavings, the offerings, that however you're going to activate. So the new moon is more about the intentions, and then after the new moon, before the first quarter moon, you're really understanding like what steps need to be taken so that those intentions can come through and come happen. Then the first quarter moon is going to be the moon that really reveals to you, because of the steps you've taken since the new moon, what direction are you headed in. You might not be able to see the direction that you're going in until the first quarter moon, and that's really a part of the purpose of that first quarter moon, is to be like, oh, like, I have clarity now. There's light that there's more light now that I can see. I can see more light. I can see more clarity. There's not so much darkness in the night. There's more light in the night. So I'm able to see, like what direction did I want to go in on the new moon, and how is that reflected right here, right now on the first quarter moon, and kind of the reflection point back and forth of that energy. First quarter moons can also be like a profound time of grounding. So if you have set any intentions on that new moon and done any work between the first quarter and the new moon, there could be some stuff on that new moon that starts to come through that really it does start to ground the intentions. It might not be the full grounding, it might not be the full entire aspect, but you're going to receive the seeds. That is a great actually example. There's going to be probably some seeds, not just direction, but probably some seeds around seeds, ideas, groundings, understandings about what you're able to do throughout that next 6-month period to grow the intentions of what was happening on that new moon. So looking at like the larger scale cycle again too. Then between the first quarter moon and the full moon, there's still this like build up. You're still, now that you have the clarity of the direction that you're going in, do I want to keep walking in that direction? What else do I need to do? Like there's maybe some further inspection. What else do I need to do if I want to change direction? How do I get to this place that I am now more fully seeing for myself? And then the full moon brings through the clarity of, this is either what I wanted, this is not what I wanted, this is really what I was doing on the new moon, this is really what was going on the new moon, and this is like, now I see, now I understand, now I see, now I understand, now I get it. The full moon also, there's a lot of people who use the full moons for a removal, a release, a warding out, a pulling out, some sort of like, you figured it out now, and because of that clarity, you're able to let go of some stuff. That's a really powerful way to work with the full moons. I personally am not super consistent in that work, because sometimes I have clarity on the full moons where I need to keep that cycle with me rather than having it warded out and removed. So it really just depends on It depends on the magic that you're working. It also depends on how you're shape-shifting and the decisions that you're making in your cycles, because cycles are so very individualized. Even though they work together with other people, they're so very individualized. And so making sure that you're keeping the awareness of like, does this work for me? Do I really need to let this go? And it's usually emotional clarity. Like, the heart is smart. Love the heart. The heart is smart. So there is smartness of the heart on that full moon. Thank goodness, because you know what? Without that clarity, I feel like there's a lot of people who would be really lost, myself included. I'm really grateful for the full moons. I'm so very grateful for them. If you do find yourself warding out and having removals happening on the full moons, it usually requires like a surrender of some kind. Like, this is the truth of how I feel. Okay, well, now it's time to reveal that, seal it up, get it out, and I'm done with it. Or it's something that you figure out and you realize, just like a truth. It also depends too of what sign the moon is in for those full moons, because you're really bringing through like the clarity, the emotional clarity for that specific sign, and the placements that you have in that specific sign, anything that has been woven into that sort of magic with that specific sign for your previous like 6 months to a year. So just making sure that you're paying attention to. That's something I do, is get super, super detailed about that stuff, but I literally do astrology stuff all day long, every single day. So if that's not your space, if you're not trying to be that detailed in it, don't worry about it. But if you are someone who wants to be that detailed in it, I'm tracking my different energies and how they affect with the transits and what's going on with my life and how that's affected with the moon cycles. It gets pretty dense, but the denseness is a part of what I practice in my personal life and in my spaces. So I offer it to you as a tool, not as a rule. It's not something you have to do, but it's there for you if you choose to pick it up and use it. So that's the full moon. Then the full moon to the third quarter moon. Usually the full moon, we still have more to walk towards. This is like one of my least favorite parts about the full moon to the third quarter moon. Mostly just because I don't like letting go of stuff. But you know what? I'm Scorpio ruled. Not fully. You think I would be all right with it by now. Anyways, moving into it, the removal part of this. The reason it makes me uncomfortable from the full moon to the third quarter moon is because, like, we can't always consistently walk forward. We have to eventually let go of some stuff and start being in the removal process. It is what it is. Saying some goodbyes, okay, realizing some of your lies, understanding, oh, maybe you need to cry a little bit about it, okay? So the full moon to the third quarter moon, it really helps you realize, like, what is it that you're walking towards letting go of something from the full moon to that next new moon. You're walking towards letting go of something. You're also walking towards a grounding of some kind, because that balsamic moon, which is right before the next new moon, that's where the cycle comes to ground. So say that the new moon is in Cancer, the balsamic moon, that's right before the next new moon, will also be in Cancer. And so there is a grounding of that intention or the work that was done on that previous new moon. So the full moon is like the peak, it's the apex. And the frustrating part for me is like, I would like to keep climbing, please and thank you. Can we please keep, but no, we have to go back into the shadow. That's a part of the cycles, duh. So going back into the shadows then, because the third quarter moon really reveals to us, like, what direction are we walking in, that we now have the clarity of what needs to be let go of. Also too, the first quarter moon, the third quarter moon, those are more times of receiving. So there's like work being put in at the beginning of the cycle. There's still work being put in from the full moon to the third quarter moon. Although full moons can be more times of rest for people, just because the full moons can be a lot to digest. Okay, the full moon has a lot of information. It can be a lot of work. It can be a lot of work. So if you're working through a lot on the full moon, totally valid. That's just what it is. New moons sometimes can be a lot too, but it's like more in the darkness and the shadows. It's not as severe most of the time in the new moon energy in like the intensity as it is with the full moons. Full moons, they can be very large and intense. So anyways, not to like compare the two, that's just how I experience them. So if that's different for you, totally valid. Third quarter moon, again, so that's like the signification of like, oh, now I understand where I'm walking into the darkness. Because during that balsamic moon, that is the darkest moon in the sky. There's no light. There's no light. None of it. None. We got none. No moon with the sun. That's it. We're done. So the balsamic moon is like, okay, the cycle's done. We're over now. We're going to put it into the darkness. We're going to shed it. We're going to get this layer done and out and integrated in. Balsamic moons are also a big time of rest. Big time of understanding. Usually the balsamic moon, in my experience, is more to digest than the new moon. It's like the fullest moon, the brightest moon in the sky is a lot to digest, and then that balsamic moon is just so dense because it's the grounding of the previous 28 days. So you're really like sitting and understanding and like relating and integrating, and you're also integrating who you were in every single phase of that cycle, and it can be a lot. That can be a lot. So take your time on the balsamic moon. If you find yourself moving slower, gradually do what you need to do. Going back to the full moon to the third quarter moon, that's really like figuring out, like, you may not see what direction you're walking in to let stuff go yet, but you're walking in the direction, moving intuitively. Then when you get to the third quarter moon, it's the kind of aha moment of like, oh, this is what I need to let go of, and this is how I need to do it so that I can start that new cycle that I want to. So the third quarter moon, you're already looking ahead to that new cycle. You're already looking ahead to like, what is it that I want to start? What is it that needs to come with me? What is it that needs to get left behind? What is it that I need to unbind? Is there anything I need to bind to me or with me so that it can be with me in the next cycle? So that's a third quarter moon, actually, I suppose, is kind of a binding and unbinding moon. Interesting. I don't know that I thought about it like that before, but that is one of the purposes of that moon. Cool. New things. So that's the third quarter moon. And then from the third quarter moon to the balsamic moon, it's very focused on just being in that energy of like, this is the direction I need to go in, and making sure that you can kind of have a focal point of light on the other side, that new moon. And what new cycle are you starting? Because we are going into the dark ride. It's like having all the lights turned off, but you got to get up in the middle of the night to go use the restroom. Okay, you didn't turn a lamp on. You know the area, you know the terrain, you know the room. But if you're staying at a guest house, you might stub your toe. Okay, so just making sure that you know, like, getting your bearings while you're in the light part of the cycle is really important for when you're in the dark part of the cycle, because then you are able to walk kind of blind, and be kind while you're blind. Be kind to yourself, be kind to other people, and not be so stressed, because if there isn't the integration of like the full moon stuff that's happening, the brightness, and then sometimes going into that darkness can be a little bit stressful, and I don't want that for anybody. So you know what? Just pay attention how you need to, you know? Pay attention how you need to. But that's the balsamic moon, is that grounding. Again, like grounding every single phase of who you have been and what you have been and where you have been. And oh my goodness, what did you weave in? What did you leave? It can be a lot. That's also a time of leaving too, the balsamic moon, having the literal, how do I say this? Having the literal cycle come to the earth, having it come earthside. This can also be a time too where, like, if you had the intention on that new moon to have something ground in that cycle, say that you're working with something very specific. There's like, we're going to use the new moon in Cancer as an example again. Say that there's a new moon in Cancer and you're like, I know that Cancer is at this placement in my chart and these are the placements I have in Cancer, and like, to work with that, this is what I want to do and receive in this cycle. And you set those intentions on the new moon. The balsamic moon is probably where you're going to get your answers, you're going to have your receiving, and if you are not able to receive it for some reason in that cycle, you're going to realize why and what needs to be done about it in the next cycle that's to come. The balsamic moon is not usually a lot of fun, but it can be very, very rewarding. There can also be some warding and boarding, like some protection work that might need to be done. If you need to get protection work done, the balsamic moon is in my favorite moon to do it on. Oh, you're telling me that it's going to be completely dark and nobody's going to be able to see it? Thank you. Put me in the shadow. Veil me. Ward me. I don't need other people to see it. You need me to do protection work? Got it. Okay. Let the night be no light. Put me in the darkness. So that's one of the reasons, not to reveal too much of myself, but that's one of the reasons I love the balsamic moon, is because it is very secret. It's very secretive. It is a time of great grounding. It's also, because it is a time of great grounding, it's the time where the moon work is connected to our earth energy, more like the water and the earth kind of come together. And so getting any energy, how do I say that? Oh my goodness, the water and the earth, literally anything in your practice that would be water and earth combined, the combination of that, whether it be protection or not, I just personally prefer that space for protection work. So discern for yourself, but water and earth are going to be connected during the balsamic moon, more integrated than in other spaces within the moon cycle. The balsamic moon it can correct people. It's a space of correction. That's also true. And it'll change your direction. That's also true. Like, it's a space of correction in the sense that if there's anything that needs to be corrected internally for you, it'll be corrected there. If there's anything that needs to be corrected externally, you're probably going to realize, like, oh, I understand their lies now. I understand. I realize. I open my eyes. I realize now. Because the balsamic moon, it asks us to go inward and be very internal. And also the process of grounding, the way that I experience that, is something that's very, very humbling. It keeps me connected to the earth. I have so many different gifts that I sit with that are so heady, and they're so up in the sky, and they're so up and out there. And so I really, really appreciate when the energy is, especially with the moon, with the shape shifting, the emotion, the water energy. I really appreciate the energies that are more grounding. Keep me on the earth, please, and thank you. I would love to be on the earth, and I'm grateful to be on the earth. I'm grateful to be a human being on the earth. The balsamic moon will remind you that gratitude of humanness. So move it how you need to. And again, if you need to get protection work done, weave it into that balsamic moon, because then you'll be able to leave it behind in that cycle and not bring it with you in the next one too. It's a very protective moon. It's a very, 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 can't overstate it, protective moon. Very protective moon. So that's the breakdown of what we have going on in the moon phases. That's how I work with them. Like I said earlier, if there's any other nuances that you sit with, valid, okay? Valid. The other thing too that I want to talk about in this video is that we do have the yearly cycles. So I'm going to get into in the next video on this, in this course on moon and eclipse magic, I'm going to get into more of this, how this yearly cycle ties in with our eclipses. But I do just kind of want to bring it up as like a prerequisite to that information. And also it's how our moons work. So like, why not talk about it here in the moon magic video, you know? So moon magic on a yearly basis. So again, the new moon in Cancer, an example, that new moon, we're going to have it. And then we have that monthly moon cycle where we're going through that cycle. We would have, that's probably going to be a full moon in Capricorn. And then we have full moon in Capricorn. We're going to have the balsamic moon in Cancer. Then we're going to go into the next new moon. Okay, so we have that monthly cycle. It's been 1 month. Beautiful. About a month. Beautiful. Love that. Then about 6 months later, probably when the new moon is in Capricorn, that full moon is going to be in Cancer. And there's going to be an even bigger revealing, an even bigger feeling. Also too, going through, going through the moon cycles, they kind of work backwards, a little funky. They work backwards. So we have the new moon in Cancer. What do I mean by that? New moon on a yearly cycle, it's the new moon in Cancer. Then it would be a balsamic moon in Cancer. That's the next moon phase in Cancer. Then it's going to be in between the balsamic and the third quarter moon. And then it's going to be the third quarter moon. And then it's going to be in between the third quarter moon and the full moon, and then you're going to have the full moon. So it works backwards. It's a little bit different, but that's how our lunar nodes are ruled. So to be honest with you, strangely, it makes sense. The lunar nodes do reverse. They go backwards. They're the one placement in our chart that is constantly in retrograde, but they're not even technically, they're in retrograde just because that's how we talk about them, in the sense of like it's moving backwards, but that's the only direction they go. So they're just moving forward. They're just going opposite as everybody else is going. No traffic jams, hopefully. Just another lane to be in. So with that yearly moon cycle though, going back to that, the yearly moon cycle, because it works backwards, paying attention to what, so say that you did weave something into that new moon in Cancer, and you have like really specific, again, going back to like the detail, like, you know, that Cancer is in this part of your chart and you have these other placements in it. This is the work you want to do because you know that that is interwoven with it. Then all the other moon phases, as they're moving backwards throughout the year, they're going to be connected to that new moon work that you did on that new moon in Cancer. All the other Cancer moon phases are going to be connected to that new moon in Cancer until a year later, you get back to another new moon in Cancer. And then the cycle, you start a new one. So that 1 month of cycles, reverse it. Instead of it going from a new moon to a first quarter, to a full moon, to a third quarter, to a balsamic, to a new moon, flip it, reverse it. It's a new moon to a balsamic moon, to a third quarter, to a full moon, to a first quarter, to another new moon on a yearly cycle is how it flips. It's a change in grips. True. Change in grips. That's how it flips. You know what? That's valid. So then working through, so say that new moon that's in Capricorn 6 months later, where the full moon in Cancer would be, this is like such a detailed example, so hopefully this makes sense, where that new moon in Capricorn is, where the full moon in Cancer would be, then those cycles are also interwoven, because any intentions that you put into that new moon in Capricorn 6 months after that new moon in Cancer, where the full moon in Cancer is going to be with the new moon in Capricorn, what you set the intentions where that full moon in Cancer is going to be on that Capricorn moon are going to be now woven into, whether you realize how or not. It usually takes a couple of years for those things to be revealed, but they're going to be woven together now, because the full moon clarity that comes through with it gets really intricate when you get into it like that. Okay, so I recommend, because we're not going to go super deep into that, it feels almost intangible to do on a collective level, honestly, now that I'm like sitting here talking about it on the screen. Oh my goodness. And I don't want to stress anybody out either, because that's a very detailed information. So what I would recommend, like a process of how to process that for yourself within your work, is just start paying attention to like what the moons mean for you. How do they work for you? How do you work with the phases of the moon? And how do the different signs, when the moon is in different signs, how does that interact with your chart? That's going to help to let you know, like, grow slow. Grow slow. Moon magic is not something that you want to like impact and then all of a sudden there's like, it's not a collision sort of work. It's cyclical cycle work. There are transits and placements within astrology that are more the impact work, but that's not necessarily the moon work. Sometimes it can be, but usually if there's an impact on those balsamic moon and it comes to ground, it's normally a humbling one. So just do what you need to do in that space as it needs to be, and give yourself grace and patience as you learn this, because it is something that's very intricate and everyone's going to experience the moon cycles literally so differently, because our charts on an individual level are so different. They're so different. So if you're able to really like sit with the nuances of it for yourself and figure out too, like, when I first started studying moon magic, I was thinking about our cycles more on a month-to-month basis, because it's pretty easy to comprehend that on a beginner level. But just remember that there is going to be impacts later on with the cycles that you're weaving. Because when I first started, I don't know if anybody else has done this, but when I first started, I didn't really think about that. I was just like, okay, well, it's this cycle. Like, I'll just do it this cycle, and then I'll start a new cycle in the but that's not how it works. You start one cycle, it's going to be there for an entire year, even though it's really like the impact of it, the first bit of it, talking about impact, the first bit of it is going to be in that first moon cycle, that month-long moon cycle. It's going to be pretty strong there, but it's also going to be interwoven into a whole bunch of other stuff that you're doing later on down the road. And like I said, I look back now years ago, and there's no way that younger me would have known. There's no way. So just something to keep in mind if you're a beginner to this work, and you're like just kind of getting your foothold in it, because I've realized in my sessions with people recently that there's so many new people. Thanks for being here. There's so many new practitioners, like 6 months to a year and a half, people who have been in the practice just for I would consider that a shorter amount of time. Like, you got some work under your belt for sure, but also like you have just begun. It's great. So welcome. I'm grateful to have you here. But if you're in that space of like just getting into it and just getting started with it, let it be easy for yourself. Okay, don't stress yourself out with it, because you don't want to weave stress into it either. You know what I mean? Like, you can leave that behind. Any details you need to leave behind, just be kind to yourself while you're moving through it, because you're the one who's brewing it, you know? So you be kind to yourself, then that's how the spirits and the beings are probably going to meet you too. And if not, learn the lesson, kick them out. That's how I feel about that. But it is what it is. Yeah. So that's today's video, today's episode. Like I said, this is a part of a larger course. I'm going to be releasing them before this eclipse season. That way you have the information. You can wield it how you need to. It's going to be an interesting time, this eclipse season, if you're watching it. If you're watching this season, it's going to be an interesting season. We have Pluto moving into Capricorn for the final time in our lives, and it's we're gonna see what's up when we get there. And I'll bring updates for you too. That's just what it is. So yes, but that's the first one. Gratitude, reverence, and love to you, for sure. Honestly, thank you for being here. Seasoned practitioners and new practitioners. I find myself recently working with both ends of those extremes. So thank you so much for the support and for your love too. Thank you. And gratitude, reverence, and love to the great being, the great mother, the great father, and the spirits and the beings of love, truth, and free, and the indigenous spirits where you are and where I am. Gratitude, reverence, and love to you. And gratitude, reverence, and love to you who is listening and watching, if you're watching it. Because there's some platforms it's more audio based, but thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here. That's so cool. All right. I think that's it. I think we're done. Go out, have some fun, you know? Remember to play a little bit. There's a lot of serious transits happening right now. like a lot of serious transits happening right now. So make space for play if you're able to, and be gentle and kind with yourself. And I'll talk to you soon.